Welcome to the BXG Podcast, the podcast where pop culture and nerd culture meet.
You think it's just going to be barbecue sauce?
Because if you actually read those books, it's just gobbledygook.
I really think clothes should be mandatory.
Speaking of Star Wars,
Captain America.
trailer reaction video. The Last of Us, episode 2, HBO. Pedro Pascal, Bella Ramsey, the whole nine. We covered it pretty in depth last week as far as the who's who here. But we have episode 2 titled Save Who You Can Save. And this episode, we're going to go, we'll try to go as spoiler free as possible to start with, in case you haven't watched it just yet, which I wouldn't know what in the hell you're waiting for, but
Sure.
Here we are. So in this episode, it really focuses on Joel, Pedro Pascal, Ellie, Bella Ramsey, and Tess, Anna Torv. And the beginning of this was a very interesting departure from the game, in which it gave us a snippet of a Indonesian doctor kind of studying one of the early cases of the outbreak and seeing one of these patients. I'm not gonna go into that just yet, but seeing one of these patients and then drawing her conclusion as to what should be done to kind of alleviate the symptoms of this thing. And then when we flash forward, the bulk of the episode is spent traversing the city outside of the quarantine zone in Boston, as they're trying to make their way towards the State House to drop Ellie off with the Fireflies that they're meeting. And along the way, there's some different scenes that are used for some exposition to kind of explain the virus, how it passes from one person to the next, how the fungus on the ground kind of works with everything around them, which they go into a little bit. They give a little bit more depth in the making of the episode snippet that comes after, if you're watching on HBO Max. And they visit a hotel very briefly, then the museum is in the game one of the very first opportunities you get to deal with the clickers. And so they adapted that for the show, obviously. And then kind of the State House scene at the end of the show. So without really hitting anything super spoilery, what were your thoughts on episode 2 here?
Okay, so this show's obviously very good. I mean, it'd be weird to be like the whatever 2% of people that don't like this show on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever. That's very odd and everything. But because I don't want to do any spoilers. The show's very good. You should watch it. I've never played the video game. Janie is not into video games at all, and she really likes the show. It's appointment viewing. Like, our thing is, when does this come out? When is it available on HBO Max? We are going to watch it the second, literally the second I have the thing come up. So I have some questions for you based on you having the depth knowledge and all the stuff that I don't necessarily have. The first question I really have for you is, why do you think this show is so popular?
Why do I think the show is so popular?
From the get-go, because yes, it sold 17 million copies of video games. I understand that, but 300 million people live in the United, and so this show is everywhere. Like, if I didn't watch this show, it's literally everywhere. And so why do you think this show is so popular?
So number one, I think that star power helps. And Pedro Pascal is very, we've said like the whole Hansel thing from Zoolander. He's so hot right now, right? And in a stretch of however many years, let me I have IMDb up at the moment, but in the stretch of just a few years here with I'm trying to find the exact, 2014 was really where his big run of things started with his appearance on Game of Thrones. And since that time, obviously The Mandalorian's huge. He was in Wonder Woman 1984 and now this. And so if you're
you're missing one key.
The
thing.
Sia video, or
no,
what was that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Wow. Oh my God.
Talent. Yeah. The unbearable weight of massive talent. But I was thinking from the perspective of, okay, Game of Thrones, DC
Sure,
universe,
okay. Yeah,
Star Wars, and now this is it hits all the notes of,
yeah,
kind of like nerd culture or whatever. So I think the star power helps. I think that the quote unquote zombie genre was really beat to death over the last 10 years, primarily by The Walking Dead, but other iterations as well, whether it be TV or film or even games. I think that the other thing that I think is HBO is synonymous with high quality. And if you move over to the video game space, whether it be any of the various first party studios, whether it be Santa Monica, Sucker Punch, Naughty Dog, whatever, Sony first party studios are synonymous with high quality. And Naughty Dog, who made the original Last of Us and the sequel, I don't know why I phrased it that way, but Naughty Dog, who shepherded this series, is arguably the most high quality game developer in the world. Now, you could argue from a gameplay perspective, not as great as even other things within the first party, but in terms of, we're going to offer you a extremely cinematic experience with a high quality narrative, those sort of things. So I just feel like the weight behind just saying The Last of Us from Naughty Dog on HBO is going to get people excited. And there's enough people out there who have bought the game, played the game, whatever, to sort of, even in this, like our situation, to sort of proliferate, okay, I really love this thing. You, who is a doesn't really play video games or whatever, but can also respect a really well told story, you're going to be into this. And I think that they're very careful. They were very careful with the games, and they're very careful with the show to not say zombies, right?
Yeah,
they're not zombies, they're infected. And Exhibit A here, the clicker
right
behind me, there is something different about this. It is something that is, it's in its own way scary, especially with the presentation that they've offered in the show that they didn't necessarily offer in the games. And I think and it was one of the things we didn't really even touch on this in the first episode. The lead in, like the opening, was from like a talk show from the 60s with these different scientists or what have you. And the one scientist is explaining how, these sort of fungal, bacterial, viruses, whatever, aren't possible today. But if the climate were to like change a few degrees north, basically, if the global climate were to rise a few temperatures or a few degrees, then this could be plausible. And now here we are. And if you really think about it, that makes this all the more terrifying, right? Because
Right.
cordyceps is a real thing. I mean, that's we talked about the cordyceps is a real thing found within the animal kingdom. And so I think that number one, it breathes a little bit of fresh life, no pun intended, into this sort of genre. I think that star power is a big thing, especially with Pedro Pascal as the lead. And then I just think the promise of quality that comes with the two partners that are involved, Naughty Dog and HBO, and the fact that one of the series creators, and we'll get into a little bit of that discussion as well, Neil Druckmann, is so heavily involved, he directed the second episode.
Right.
And
Yeah,
from
that
what
was
I
cool.
understand, from what I understand or what I gather, this is his first go around directing, television or film or whatever. But he's very talented on the gaming side of things, with having directed The Last of Us, Last Part 2, and major pieces of Uncharted 4. He's got a lot of talent, but I think it's just kind of all those things together. And when you put all of that quality into one box, it's gonna be good. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
Breaking the video game curse, the adaptation curse is kind of what's being bantied about. I think that
Well, Mario Brothers in 92 or 93
Right.
did that already, but
right. But I think that there's been several successful adaptations, Sonic, Castlevania, the anime on Netflix, Cyberpunk Edge Runners, Vox Machina, or whatever it's called. The Witcher,
yeah,
that's muddy because those are fantasy novels, but
I need a Star Fox movie.
Stop it.
Love that game.
You're getting a Star Fox.
Fox was cool,
right? Harry Styles, Star Fox.
Well, I meant like not that Star Fox, Marvel Star Fox,
No.
but
yeah, you mean Fox McCloud. But I think that's
was a cool game.
I think that to answer your question, I just think that it's all of those things combined. And
okay. And so this leads me to just this, because you are, obviously the video game person, and I like 90s video games, never really played much since. But having this particular video game background and knowing what happens in there, does this hinder or heighten this show for you? Because I think this show is awesome, and I'm surprised. I'm surprised.
In the first episode, there were changes that were made, and I thought that they were proactive changes. I think we talked a little bit about the gas masks, some of the other things. There were some pretty substantial changes in this particular episode that they talked about in the creation of. They talked a lot about the ending sequence. They talked a lot about the way that the virus is transferred via these sort of tendrils almost. They talked a lot about how, like with fungus, it's like an underground network, and if you step on a tendril here, it could wake up however many miles away. And those weren't things that were really found within the game. And they had said that part of that was that they felt, from a realism standpoint, that it was going to be more realistic to kind of understand these tendrils infecting you, rather than just sort of spores that can kind of move around in the air sort of regardless,
Right.
and don't necessarily stay static. So I thought that the tendrils thing and the sort of underground, one thing that they haven't shown yet, and we'll kind of get into this, is the human element threat. And I think that will be in the upcoming episodes, but it is something that you begin to experience within the Boston area early on in the game, where to this point in the show, it's been okay. And this is kind of like know you're infected 101. You have the runners who are recently infected. They don't look like this, right? And they're hyper aggressive, and they're going to run at you, and they're going to bite you. And
so the Pat Beverleys.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Push you from behind, trip you, whatever. But these are, the newly infected. And then you have the clickers, which is this guy. They don't move as fast and they click, hence the name, right?
Yes.
And Ellie kind of alludes to this, that they can't see, like I mean, you could see there's no eyes there. So the fungus is kind of growing out and it takes over their visual. And so what they end up having to do is use like echolocation and
They're Batman.
well, yeah, like bats almost. And so, but they are more lethal. And to this point, through the first 2 episodes, this has been the primary danger, is the runners and the clickers now in episode 2. So the changes are kind of what keeps me on my toes, but I've played through the museum scene probably 6 or 7 times, and I'm still sitting there. I know exactly what happens. Still sitting there biting my nails on the edge of my seat. And so that says to me, even more so than, changes or not changes, or, some of these different elements, is it make it less suspenseful knowing? No, because I think that there's enough element of change. And I can tell you exactly in that particular sequence, when the roof, we're going to get into mild spoilers, but when the roof caves in from the doorway in the game, you're separated. So you're playing as Joel, and Tess and Ellie are separated from you. And so you have to navigate that same area. And now, like, the recreation of that section of the museum was really impeccable from the game. And you have to navigate through that area with Joel. And there's 4 or 5 clickers in that section, whereas there were 2 here in the show. And so, but part of it was him running down the hall was frame by frame, basically. And some of the different, the one thing that I will say that I, as I almost said the game, but as the show progresses, will they match the level of violence and brutality when it comes to when they are face to face with human foes? I don't think that there's no level of violence that we've seen even in The Walking Dead that's going to be uncomfortable when it comes to killing these creatures, right? You kind of saw that a little bit through that sequence, but where does the line get drawn when it comes to human on human interactions through the violence? Because the one thing about this game is that you feel every kill. It's not like Uncharted, even, for example, which is from the same studio, where Nathan Drake is a mass murderer. He's just running and gunning. You know what I mean? It's high adventure. But in The Last of Us, when you kill someone, whether it be stealth or whatever, the controller vibrates. You can hear them. They're like gasping for air and gurgling as like blood comes out of their mouth. And there's sections where you can use like different shanks and like spiked clubs, and you can hear like the metal just ripping out of skull. It's very unsettling at times, and it makes you feel the weight of every one of those kills. And so I'm curious, as this moves forward, just how violent the show is going to be, because the game is extremely violent. It's very brutal. It's visceral at times. And so that's kind of what I'm curious for moving forward. But with that being said, I think we'll get into a little bit more spoilers, and I'm going to kind of kick the questions back over to you.
Okay.
Now, with spoilers in mind, we're going to spoil the hell out of this. There are a couple different scenes that are very important. And I think we kind of have to jump to the end to sort of talk about those. And I think the big spoiler for this episode is that the Tess character in the encounter with the clickers gets herself bitten and then sacrifices herself to see that Joel and Ellie can continue on. And so your prediction from last week for the Tess character is eventually she's going to turn on them because she's a shady character.
Yeah.
So she was going to turn all right, but maybe
Yeah.
not in the way that you had
No.
anticipated.
No. I will say I did question mark it immediately. No body, no die for me. I didn't see anything yet, so I'm not sure she's dead.
Well, I mean,
I would assume so.
kaboom.
Kaboom. But I've watched enough stuff in my life that until you see that dead body, you're not 100% sure.
Well, I'll just confirm.
She's dead.
She gone.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I just like saying no body, no die. But yeah, that was I mean, it'd be weird if you didn't play the video game. If you're like, yeah, she's gonna get bitten and then she's gonna sacrifice. If you saw that coming without playing the video game, I know in the video game it's different. From what I've understood, like she sacrifices herself in a different way.
Well, yeah, and that was one of the changes that was made. She still sacrificed herself. Yeah. And this is one of those things that it's odd a little bit. As I said, that there's been so much emphasis put on the infected in the show versus the game, because in the game, they come to that area and the Fireflies are all dead, but they've been killed by the soldiers who are called Fedra, and that's like the federal army. And that's who starts to close in around the state house once they're inside of it. And so that was a big change from the game that they acknowledged. They felt like it would serve the story more to kind of, with the whole, like, if you step on a tendril, so to speak, that it can wake up however far away. And so I think that there's some sections that'll play into down the line as well. But that was a section that was very much changed, because she was in that section. She's surrounded by soldiers, and then they break in, and she's just shooting, and it buys time for them to get away. But in this sense, she douses the place with gasoline, throws a bunch of grenades on the ground, and then just blows herself up. Go ahead.
Was her clicking the thing supposed to be like a clicking thing? Like she was one of the clickers?
No, no. And actually,
that's how I took at it. That's how I looked at it. Like, she's just being like clicking.
No, she just couldn't get it going. But also, the lighter that she had, which was like kind of like a Zippo type thing, was, and this is an Easter egg for your eagle-eyed watchers, but it was the same model as Sam Drake's lighter in Uncharted 4. And so there's little Easter eggs that are kind of left around in various locations, and I'm sure that more will come across. We'll probably see some Crash Bandicoot shit at some point. But
if he just swings across the screen.
Well, I don't think that's probably what's going to happen, but actually I can say, so
I do actually play that game randomly.
So here's something that, and this actually ties into this a little bit. Two of the points from this episode that I wanted to kind of touch on outside of just the story arc. Naughty Dog is known, as I said, for being a very high quality. They're going to deliver very high quality experiences in every world that they explore, whether it be through Uncharted or The Last of Us, or going back, decades to Crash Bandicoot, Jack and Daxter, whatever. They're known for something that, on other podcasts that they've talked about, production per square inch of the game. And they're going to pack everything they can into these things to make it feel as authentic as possible. And I thought that the small sequence in the hotel was a really good example of that. And I think that they're doing a great job of transferring and translating the environmental storytelling found in the game into the show. And I think that comes in a couple different ways. The buildings, dilapidated, covered in, flora, and then the museum itself covered in all the different spores and everything. The hotel was a cool example because it's flooded. There's, things are dripping. There's a frog that's like, or a toad, whatever, that's like jumping up and down on the piano. And I think that with the cinematography in this, they've done a good job of having those little breaks, even if it's just for a second here or there, to show that it's only been 20 years since the outbreak, but nature is reclaiming the lands. And they talked about some of the different aspects of like the bombings. And that was going back to the opening piece where the doctor said, they said, is there a vaccine? What's the cure? How do we treat this? And she says, there is no vaccine. What's your advice? Bomb the city.
Yeah.
And so then flash forward and Tess and Joel are explaining as they're walking with a little bit of exposition that as they come across a crater, that Boston was bombed, and it happened to most of the major cities, that they were bombed in some capacity to try to slow the spread. So talk to me about your thoughts with some of the different pieces of environmental storytelling throughout the city as they kind of traverse from where we leave them at the end of episode 1, finding their way into kind of the unpatrolled outskirts, into the hotel, the museum, the State House, and beyond.
Okay, so I thought about this quite a bit, and recently in my science class, we talked about invasive species, and we had our
good
test.
Time for that, huh?
Yeah, it perfectly timed. I don't know if kids are watching this show.
God, I hope not.
I don't know. I was watching NYPD Blue when I was 10, but this is what it is.
That's network TV. This is a little bit different.
Yeah, I still saw Dennis Franz's ass. And I've met Dennis Franz in person, full circle. I didn't tell him that or anything. But anyhow, we had a test on this, and there's a picture of a golf course, and there's a person golfing, and there's 2 different types of grass, and there's an alligator. And this is in Florida. And it says, what's the invasive species? And it says, is it the gator, the person, the grass that's been there since forever, or this grass that a human planted? And one of my students comes up to me and he's like, well, isn't it the human? And I said, I can't give you the answer. Philosophers would probably say a human is the invasive species.
Right.
And, and if you've ever watched that show, I think it's called like After Humans or something like that, where the world is just lush and green and everything is thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what this show looks like. Even that environmental thing is like things are lush and green. And like, yes, there's these, people overtaken by the Cordyceps virus, but it's nature. Yeah. And it's not, it doesn't look like Dubai. It looks like, it looks like the middle of, honestly, it looks like Juneau, Alaska, where I live, where it's just green and lush. And so I thought that was really cool, of like this idea of like, okay, all these humans are dying out, and now we have plants taking over. You said the flora taking over the buildings. And so I don't know if this is the idea of the gamers or not, but in a way, it makes humans seem like the invasive species, and that the student that came up with this is a very smart student that asked me this question. This is his parents work at the college, stuff like this. So he was the only one that said this, and I thought that was awesome. So our future is in good hands with Liam's out there. I'll just say this, but that idea of
depends on the Liam.
Depends on the Liam, right?
Yeah.
I know 2 good Liams, actually. I know 2 good Liams. And 3, Liam Gallagher, Oasis. Depending on like the
Debatable.
music's good.
Yeah,
the music's good. The music is, yeah.
I said maybe.
Art, not the artist. But anyhow, so I thought the idea of that was really cool. And it's like, oh, is this actually such a bad place, or is it just a bad place for humans?
Right.
And I think that's really cool. And I don't know if that's what the game's trying to get across, or what but I like that idea of like humans being the invasive species. I think that's such a cool idea, and not enough of that. There's too much of like humans are here to run the show, and not enough of like, you know what, these things are here before humans, and these things are going to be here after humans. And I really like that. So I don't know if that's exactly the answer you wanted, but I really was the way it looked just looked so awesome. And you're like, boy, that's what like LA gets crapped on because it's so gray all the time. But when it rains, like it has recently, like LA's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, we just don't need people doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the thing with this.
I would say if you're into things where nature reclaims what's hers, then the PlayStation 4 console first party exclusives is the place for you. The other thing that really stuck out to me in this episode, and I just want to see what your thoughts on this was, thought that especially the sequence through the museum, the sound design of the way that tension is built in those moments. And I can tell you from that sequence, the sound is taken for the most part frame by frame from the game, and the way they use kind of the high pitches and even like the distant, like you can tell things are falling somewhere in the distance, right? You don't know exactly what it is. Pipes, things are running through pipes. It's, you know, rats, whatever. And it just builds and builds on this, on all of this tension. And that's what, and I keep going back to this as far as the clickers and the runners. One thing that the game does pretty well is sort of use the idea that scarcity builds tension. And I thought that in the sequence in the museum with the clickers, they did a very good job of that. But what did you think overall about the sound design, and not just from the perspective of the, you know, using the soundscape to build the tension, but also what were your thoughts on the sounds of the clickers in general?
Okay, so my biggest history with things like this are Resident Evil.
Sure.
You know, and I love that game growing up. I mean, honestly, like it was so cool. This is kind of that idea, that same kind of thing where things are jump scares and that building up where, you know, Resident Evil had a knack for that thing where they trick you. And at the end, so you'd look around, but it wasn't anything. And then it would come from behind.
Right.
And that's what this really set up.
Standard
like
haunted house fare, I would say.
Yeah, a standard haunted house fare, which you've been to a haunted house with me. I love screaming at a haunted house and hitting on underage girls. Apparently, that's what I did at the time. Although she wasn't really. I mean, we're 2 years apart. It's just the way it looks. But
wouldn't admit that on the internet.
I was just being funny. Yeah, just admit that. But it's a funny joke for all those that know that story. But anyhow, the idea that of like beginning you one way and then looking the other, but then also having that idea of you don't know where stuff is going to happen. It also, to me, it just gave you that creepy, if you went to a museum in the middle of the night vibe, or you're in the house at the middle of the night vibe. That's weird. And whether it's, you know, this time or, you know, tonight, if I went out to a museum and just walked around, it'd be creepy.
Yeah.
And I thought it did a real cool vibe of like, this could be any town USA, anytime, and just, there we go. And I really liked it. I mean, when it finally, the clickers make that sound, which is creepy, and like it gives you like a good spine tingle. You know, it's not over the top. It's not a screaming thing, but it's just enough to know that they're there. It's like a tapping sound, and it's just enough. I think it's so cool. Like, I'm assuming the video game does the same thing, or they took it from the video game.
It is the same actors who
Okay.
did the sound effects for the game, did the sound effects for the
That's
clickers
cool.
from the show. So there's a man and a woman who do both of the clicker.
That's funny.
Audio.
I would not have known it was like actual like people doing it. That's
cool. Yeah. And they did some. I think that they were. I believe that I read also that they were two of the clickers who like actors as well that did like the full. That prosthetic has to take forever.
I can't even imagine.
But I feel like it was something that Bella Ramsey said in an interview ahead of the show, that despite the fact that they are creepy and scary and violent, there's almost a beauty to them that is not really found in this genre. And that's like the whole zombie versus infected thing, whatever, but it is different. And I think that, and obviously, I'm a huge fan of the game and all that, but I do think that it is thoughtful in a way that is, we want to separate ourselves from the rest of like Resident Evil, right? And so not only in the game space, but also at the time, this is like at the height of the popularity of the Walking Dead AMC show and other, various movies and games and shows like we talked about. But I thought that with the game and then subsequently, they didn't make a whole lot of like stylistic changes with the clickers as far as their look. And so I felt like they really thought through this to say, okay, this is the best representation, is almost to take it frame by frame out of the game. And it is thoughtful in a way that's different from mostly everything else in this genre. And so the sound effects, give them the creepy factor, and then the look of them also very, super like unsettling. And I mean, I just thought that it is a, it's a faithful adaptation on that front. But we got one right in for the chats of us question, and it just said anti-vax. So any
I wonder who wrote that.
What do you think that their intent was with this?
Well, Ellie is double infected, so they're going to use her for a vaccine.
Well, I don't know. Is she double infected? Yeah,
she got bit twice.
She doesn't get bit a second time in the game.
I thought she had the second thing, right? In the
she
show,
had the second, right? Yeah,
wound.
No, she had like a second, like a scratch or whatever. But but you can kind of see the difference.
And are they in like? So this is my theory.
Okay. I will not confirm or deny anything, and I will. I
don't want
to as flat as possible.
Is she? So I feel like eventually she's going to get captured by the government or whatever. I mean, I feel like he might try to like keep her from that. I feel like he's like, I don't want you, because he doesn't trust the government, because why would you? And then eventually she does get captured by the government, and then she's like a superpowered person, like a superhuman. And she's like, F this, and starts wrecking shit. And that's what I think with her. Because she's already defeated this like once, and like everybody else has quarter stepped out. And then she's like, eh. And then, and she's got a little sass thing going on there, so she's likable.
She's a shitty teenager, for sure.
Yeah, and I like that. I just like, it is what it is on that end, but I don't like that in my class, but I like it in the TV show.
Right.
And,
your kids are like, what, 10, 11?
They're like 10, yeah.
Tweens?
Yeah. She's 19, right? But she's
14.
Playing a 14-year-old, right?
Yeah. I think.
Because she's been around for a while. She was on Game of Thrones.
Yeah, she was on Game of Thrones.
She can't be that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the things is she's older.
She looks young though. She looks super young. I mean,
she's old to play the part. Trying to see here if there's a September 10th, 2003. So she's 19.
Yeah.
She's
So,
small though. She's only like 5'1".
she's small.
So that
Well,
helps,
yeah,
I guess.
yeah. Oh,
But-
small. But I don't know. I could be 100% wrong. Maybe she dies the next episode, and that's the show, or not the show, and then it's just like we just follow Pedro Pascal.
I can listen.
He turns
I can
into a
confirm,
Mandalorian. He gets a little green guy around with him, and it just does that little stuff.
That
I
does
don't know,
happen,
but
just on a different. Yeah, I'm not gonna listen. I'm not gonna give you any spoilers, but I can confirm that there are no superpowers involved in this show.
well, I shouldn't say like superpowers, but maybe she just says "F this" and
let me
starts going to
remind
town
you
on people.
Let me remind you, nothing about this is happy. Nothing.
Right.
So from beginning to end, it's just a
I'm not even saying
slog of
that's happy.
misery.
Yeah. I like that, but
Yeah. Well,
I
we'll see.
I will say, like, I read reviews where like a lot of people didn't like her at first. I like her.
No, I think she's perfectly fine.
I like her a lot.
She
I
fits
think
the
she's
bill.
sassy.
She doesn't look
and,
like her really, but
But I mean,
the attitude piece is definitely there.
oh
She's
my God,
acting,
like looking
yeah.
looking like someone. Come on, I mean,
Well,
then make a digital movie. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
then make
sure.
an animated movie. It's like
Right.
it's whatever. But I think she's great. So
I think she embodies Ellie well. I think that Pedro
Okay.
Pascal embodies Joel like.
you can buy his jacket too.
Oh,
if
man.
anybody's out there,
It is,
it's a cool jacket.
and I feel like I didn't notice it as much in the first episode, but in the second episode, I felt like he had to have sat down with Troy Baker to work on this voice because he sounds just like him. And Troy is not like, if you see a picture of Troy Baker, he's nothing like this character. So it's funny that's how voice acting works.
Do you think this is, if in modern day, just right now, is this like going to Boston wearing like a Joel Embiid jersey? Is that just the same feeling? I feel like it might actually be worse wearing a Joel Embiid jersey. I don't think the Lakers as much now. I feel like, I think if you walk around with Joel Embiid jersey, I think you're actually getting worse treatment than
Yankees
what's happening in the last. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
This Celtics fans are something else.
Yeah, well,
they got that low IQ. They got that low IQ and not a lot else. So
some of them look like that.
Yeah.
There it is.
On a good day.
So the preview for the next episode showed off Nick Offerman's character Bill.
I'm stoked. I was hoping he was just going to be Ron Swanson.
Right.
That'd be sick.
I'm a little torn about this character, and we'll get further into it obviously next week when we do the review, but he is in the game voice and looks like, to a degree, W. Earl Brown, and that is the name of Dan Doherty from the TV show Deadwood. That is the actor who plays him, and he is the voice of him in the game. And I feel like the character model as well for the most part, but I know that they, for the most part, didn't recast anyone other than Marlene and the Clickers, but I feel like that was one that they probably could have kept. But again, I think star power means something, and Nick Offerman is obviously a
breakfast guy,
more of a name than W. Earl Brown, but I don't know. We'll see. And from the looks of it, they've made a lot of changes to this section.
Sure.
And so we'll kind of
favorite
look
breakfast
and
item,
see.
Brent. Speaking of Ron Swanson, favorite breakfast item.
Sausage patties.
Breakfast sausage patty.
Like real breakfast, not just like grab and go stuff.
Yeah,
because I just eat a muffin. I eat a muffin.
No, I'm talking like you're on vacation.
Yeah,
and you're like, ooh, and you got a good buffet. I'm not talking your shit days in buffet. I'm talking like
you're not
you're talking not even a buffet. You're just at a nice place, a nice hotel, and you're like, I can get anything I want. What do you
Sausage
get?
patties.
What's your order? Sausage patties.
That's my number. That's my go-to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't like the links. They're a little too phallic for me. So I also don't like the texture of them. Why are they so smooth? I don't like that. I need a little bit of crisp. And that's why the patties are superior in every way. I also like bacon. Not gonna lie. I love bacon. You know, dippy eggs.
Who doesn't like bacon?
For you Pennsylvanians out there.
Dippy eggs, yeah.
Dippy eggs. A little toast.
Yeah.
Remember they used to have that commercial? It's like part of a balanced breakfast, and it's like milk, orange juice, a banana, fruit, toast, eggs, whatever shitty sugar-filled cereal that they're
1,200 calories, balanced breakfast.
Oh yeah, 12,000.
1,000 grams of sugar.
Yeah, 100% part of a balanced breakfast. Who puts fucking milk and orange juice in one of those pitchers? Right?
Just imagine taking a sip of one of those after the other.
Oh God, no. No, thank you.
I don't even like orange juice.
All right, The Last of Us, episode 2. It just keeps. It's just once it touches your lips, it's so good. But I digress.
You know, my favorite breakfast item.
Oh, fungus.
If I just go, what?
Fungus.
No, I don't like. I mean, I don't mind like a mushroom in my omelet.
Sure.
I like an eggs Benedict. I just like an eggs Benedict.
Yeah. Well,
a nice bechamel. Hell yeah.
Are you infected?
Oh shit! I got a fucking scratch in my arm.
Well, I knew it.
I didn't even realize. That's new.
Because I've always known you're a fun guy.
Oh, honestly, that's weird. I don't know where that came from.
That's how they get you. All right, moving on.
Damn.